There have been quite a few games in recent years that have tried to recapture the magic of the halcyon days of the Advance Wars series, seeing as how Nintendo hasn't really done anything new with it in many, many years. However, now I believe we might finally have a contender to step in and fill the gap that has been left by Intelligent Systems abandoning one of its prior flagship franchises. Today we're talking about Tiny Metal 2 with its upcoming 2026 release, my personal experience with the playtest, and my hands-on playtime with it at PAX East, and just why I think it's going to be such a strong entry in the subgenre. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my ongoing coverage of the turn-based tactics and strategy genre, such as the upcoming Tiny Metal 2, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So yes, Tiny Metal 2! Oh, this is a very interesting one. I actually had somehow never heard of the Tiny Metal franchise before, so imagine my surprise when one of the biggest and flashiest booths at PAX East was for what is essentially an Advance Wars clone, but a very, no pun intended, advanced one with a lot of iterations on the formula that I think are going to keep people very, very interested. I was able to get hands-on with the PAX East demo, as well as their playtest that they did shortly after the event, and between both versions of the game, I can safely say this one has absolutely caught my interest. Frankly, just calling it an Advance Wars clone is probably a disservice to the game, as clearly the developers at Area 35 are not only passionate players of games, but also incredibly talented devs in their own right with a strong artistic vision and a lot of mechanical inspiration that they're going to be bringing to the game. If you, like me, are unfamiliar with what Tiny Metal is, Tiny Metal 2 is going to have all of the trappings you would expect. A full campaign, various different multiplayer modes, including 1v1, 2v2 co-op, 4v2, 6 players, 8 players, etc., skirmish maps, online compatibility, 15 different commanding officers with their own strengths, weaknesses, and powers, and of course, a ton of different types of units for you to build across land, sea, and air. Interestingly, apparently, naval combat is actually new to this sequel title, and where there were only 5 COs in the original game, there are now going to be 10 new ones on top of those 5 returning. However, as you can probably see from the footage that I've got on screen for you right now, there's actually a lot of production going behind this game. There's fully fledged cutscenes, full voice acting in both Japanese and English once the full release comes around, or so I have heard. Different levels of CO powers that you're going to be able to use, not just like, a basic and a superpower, but up to 6 different abilities that will use different amounts of your meter and which will give you various different options as you navigate the battlefield. Units are much more versatile in what they're able to do, including a lot of moving and shooting at sometimes shorter ranges, as well as being able to actually set up for combo attacks to deal massive damage to the enemy. You've got radars. Fog of War is more intense as you can see where buildings are, but not what they are unless you have specific tech available to you. There's a greater breadth of different unit types, from your basic infantry to mechs and snipers to actual mech-a suits that are like the in-between between infantry and tanks, fully fledged tanks, a large suite of different aircraft, including air-to-ground fighters as well as air-to-air fighters. The list goes on, and this is just stuff that I was able to see in the demo and the playtest. However, one of the things that's most interesting about the game is that it's being fully set up to support co-op action. Almost every single skirmish map, and apparently all of the maps in the campaign, are designed with the possibility of co-op in mind, allowing you to play alongside at least one ally, if not more, sharing resources, approaching battles in a way that's complementary to the different forces and commanders that you have, and generally making for a collaborative experience that has never been something we've really seen in Advance Wars in the past. Sure, you've had like co-op skirmishes, but the idea of going into a full campaign or even having asymmetric maps where 2 commanders fight off 4 and the like, there seems like there's going to be a lot of different options here. At PAX, the demo that I played alongside a fellow congoer, a very lovely gentleman in his own right, and we were able to take to the field as I handled the ground engagements, he handled the sea engagement. Having to bounce around off of each other and navigate what I was going to be able to deal with versus what he was going to be able to deal with, making sure that one or the other of us wasn't getting overwhelmed by forces that we couldn't handle on our own, while continuing to push forward into the enemy and slowly try to bring them down, was very fun, and that was just a skirmish map for a demo. I can only imagine what campaigns are going to look like in very carefully crafted scenarios. scenarios with pre-deployed units, intentionally designed layouts to create imbalances we're going to have to navigate around, and hopefully, with any luck, difficulty modes that we can really crank up for those of us who want to get deep into the tactical sense of it. Unfortunately, though, the booth for Tiny Metal 2 was actually quite busy, so I didn't have too much of an opportunity to really sink my teeth into what we were able to play around with, as there was a pretty strict timer on the demo. Fortunately, that's where the playtest came in, and I was able to look around a lot more and discover a little bit more of what was available for some of the systems in the game. This is where I encountered the ability to have multiple different levels of power to use, all of which had different effects that were going to be applicable at different times. We were able to see, although not yet utilize, an actual ping system, so even if you're not on comms and you're like matchmaking with someone online, you can still point out where things are, what you might need, etc., which is something I'm really only used to seeing in like shooters, so very cool to see in a game like this, and very important for any sort of cooperative system. There's a much wider range of COs to play around with, even though they still haven't all been added to the game, and I had a greater variety of units to use as well, including some of my particular favorites, the snipers for infantry, who were very potent indeed, and some of the various different mecha that gave a nice balance between being a little bit more affordable than tanks, or as they're called in this, metals, while still having more durability and firepower than some of your standard infantry. It felt like there's a lot more variety and variability in terms of what level of combat prowess to cost you're able to mess around with, and I'm a particular fan of the fact that when you go to a building to heal or resupply, you can actually choose exactly what you do for a unit. What I mean by this is, in comparison to Advance Wars, where you have to put a unit on a building and then wait for it to be repaired and resupplied, if that building can even support that type of unit, here you can go and immediately spend the funds that you need or want to spend to give certain aspects of a unit's capabilities back. A nice iteration on a system that does work, but always felt, to me, a little bit clunky to try and navigate. Capturing buildings is also slightly different. Your basic infantry is the best at it now, and most buildings can be captured by them in one go, but certain more advanced facilities such as airports might take longer, especially if you're using other types of infantry that are more specialized for combat. They will be slower at capturing those buildings. It can still be done, but it puts an even stronger emphasis on the need for baseline infantry to go around and control territory, which I always underappreciated as a kid in the original Advance Wars games. I understand it's obviously a very important focus for modern Advanced War play, especially things with like Advanced Wars by Web and the like, but seeing that again there's going to be levels to this in Tiny Metal 2 is going to give you more strategic options while still having an optimal path to follow if everything in your plan is going according to, well, plan. I already mentioned the fact that the Fog of War does show you where buildings are, but not what types of buildings they are, which I do think is fun, makes scouting even more important so you know exactly what type of terrain you're going to be able to capture or what facilities your opponent might have on offer so you can start building counter units. And the inclusion of units like radars to be able to see where maybe enemies are in the Fog of War but not what they are is again going to give a little bit more play there. Your opponents are going to have to keep an eye out for where and when you might have radar units on the field, but of course there is a cost associated with it, and you're going to have less overall firepower in terms of what you're able to buy in order to have that extra information, so there's going to be some push and pull there. As far as the story and the music and the VA, obviously there's not a ton to it yet, just having played demos and playtests, but I do enjoy the music. I'm going to say right off the bat, what I've heard thus far does not have that same punchy impact that the Advance Wars series has always had, one of its biggest selling points. To this day, I still go back and listen to those OSTs, so it's a little bit of a shame, but if there's more of a focus on competitive and cooperative gameplay, then I can see there being maybe less of a need for a really powerful soundtrack. It would always be nice to have, but you know, maybe that'll be something that we can work around. I'm really enamored with the style and all the animations, both for actual combat animations and cutscenes from what little we've seen of story beats. Really cool to see that sort of cartoony anime style brought to life and made very fun for a sort of toyish war game. And the fact that we're going to have full VA is always a fun option as well. We'll have to see what the quality of the English VA is, but right now the Japanese obviously sounds pretty good, and I'm very excited to see what cast they're able to bring together when they do add the English voices to the game. At this point, the only real major point of critique that I have, and this is something that I voiced in my overall PAX East roundup that I did earlier in the month, is the fact that attack animations do feel a little bit disconnected from each other. Now, hear me out. The animations themselves are very good. Can they be polished and cleaned up and made even better? Absolutely, of course. These are still early versions of the game that we've been seeing thus far, but at baseline, they look really nice. The issue for me, and for a few other people I've spoken to as well, is that there's a hard cut between when you attack an enemy or an enemy attacks you and then when that attack lands on the target. You have a harsh cut to black, a pause of at least a few seconds, and then you see the attack landing and the resulting damage. Functionally, this is similar to the way that Advance Wars has always done it, but in Advance Wars, you've had both sets of units on the screen at the same time, and you kind of see the results of the attack immediately, whereas here you have one set of units on the screen at a time, and that hard divide between when the attacks are happening, which just feels a little jarring. Given the way that they're animated and the screen is set up, I don't know that you're really going to be able to like change that to have both units on the field at the same time, but at the very least, dramatically cutting down on the lag time in between when you see the beginning and the end of the attack will, I think, be very important for anyone who wants to have animations on. Of course, as we get into the discussion of competitive play, which is a focus that they are working on, which is really cool, we'll mention that right here at the end, you're going to have people who generally have the animations turned off, so it won't be as big of a deal, but still, you know, from a visual standpoint, and considering that most people play these games for the campaigns, play a couple skirmishes and then put them down, it's going to be important to have those animations really tuned up to the max, lest they feel like they drag and are more in the way than fun things to watch and engage with. Yes, finally, as I did just allude to, there is going to be a major focus on the competitive scene as well post-launch. The game's website even highlighting the fact that there will be ELO ranking for competitive online play. Now, exactly what sort of maybe tournament scenes or different matchmaking queues, curated rule sets and the like there will be, we have not heard anything about yet, but this has always been something that the most hardcore of Advance Wars or Advance Wars style game players have wanted. There's a reason that Advance Wars by web exists. There's a reason that people are still so into these games and play them against each other. So if Tiny Metal 2 can finally harness a proper online environment to bring those people in and give them a game to play that will be fully fleshed out in a proper game sense, not just like a web browser sense, then I think they're going to have a winning formula on their hands for support into the future. Now, that is not an easy thing to pull off. Obviously, tactics and strategy players in general are very picky and very particular about their rules and their balancing, the design of games in general, to say nothing of the very dedicated subgenre of Advance Wars players in particular, but there's obviously an attempt that is going to be made here, and I'm all for it. This is a niche that has been desperately asking to be filled for a very long time. I think the door is wide open for Tiny Metal 2 to do just that. All told, if it wasn't clear enough, I'm very excited about Tiny Metal 2. Going from a franchise that I'd never even heard of before to being one of the highlights of PAX East for me and something that is very much on my radar now is always a very exciting place to find myself in, and I can only hope that a lot of you find yourselves in that place as well. I have heard from some viewers that they had played Tiny Metal 1 in the past and weren't happy with things like the UX or limited design. Doesn't seem like any of that's going to be an issue here. The devs clearly learned a lot from that first title and are going full speed ahead into making Tiny Metal 2 as good as they can. No specific release date yet, but it is currently slated for this year, 2026, so it should not be too long before it launches. Currently, the only announced platform for release is Steam, but I imagine with any luck, it will come to consoles in the future as well. So definitely keep an eye on this one. I will have the link to its Steam page in the description here. With all that said, though, I think I'm going to wrap this one up here. What are your guys' thoughts on Tiny Metal 2, my coverage of it? Have you enjoyed what you've played of it yourself if you had the opportunity to do so? Are you intrigued based on what you've seen here? Or do you have grievances or complaints or critiques that you would like to voice? You can always drop those in the comments as well. I'm always curious to see what you guys have to say, and sometimes the developers of these games do peruse my comments, so you never know. Maybe your feedback will be found that way. That's it for me for now, though. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope that you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everyone. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.